A social media campaign calling for a boycott of the BBC over alleged biased reporting has gone viral. Viewers were urged to switch the channel off at 6 p.m. yesterday. The campaign became one of the top trending topics on Twitter. More than 900,000 people had joined in, making more than 1 million impressions of the BBC Switch Off hashtag throughout the world. The campaign was largely driven by claims of the broadcaster's bias against Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn and the belief that the BBC is increasingly pandering to the right. Corbyn, whose party has faced accusations of anti-Semitism recently, has claimed the BBC is biased towards Israel's right to exist. We've asked the BBC for comment, and the broadcaster said it's proud of being the most trusted news provider, claiming that licence fee payers get exceptional value for money. But as people took to Twitter to voice their views, it seems reasons for choosing to boycott the broadcaster are diverse. Well, what started as a pro-Corbyn left-wing hashtag was quickly adopted by some on the right of the political spectrum. UKIP used it as a way to once again call for scrapping the licence fee. I'm joined now to discuss this further by the UKIP group leader here in the London Assembly, Peter Whittle, and Mohammed Shafiq from the Ramadan Foundation. Thank you both for joining me this evening. Peter, let me start with you. The BBC is accused of perhaps having a left-wing bias, but we've seen with this campaign by supporters of Jeremy Corbyn, they have legitimate concerns, don't they? The political editor of the BBC, she coordinated the resignation of one of the MPs live on air.
Well, I think the thing is that basically what this is about is the way in which the BBC, they perceive the BBC as maybe treating one person. What I would say is that it's without question, and indeed the BBC has more or less tacitly admitted this on occasion, that they have a strong liberal bias in terms of the main issues of our time. I think that's absolutely undeniable. I mean, whether it's on migration, whether it's certainly on Brexit, whether it's on climate change, they have tended towards a certain viewpoint. And I would say there's without question the fact that that makes it a biased organisation. The problem with this campaign is that in a way it's beside the point, because we all have to pay this licence fee and we all have to do it in Britain on basically, we would be charged criminally if we did not. It's not even a civil offence. We could end up in jail for not paying it. That has actually got to go. It's got to be scrapped. But I would say that the main thing is that the BBC, particularly, for example, since the referendum vote, has shown its colours so obviously and so appallingly. I think there's no question that it's biased.
Mohammed, let me turn to you there. The BBC has been accused of having a pro-EU bias. Some of the guests that they get on, the numbers of guests they get on, supporters of Brexit consistently complain that their voice isn't represented well enough.
Well, actually, if you look at what's happened over these past few years since that referendum, Nigel Farage is on BBC Question Time 32 times. He's so on the BBC that they might as well give him his own show. The reality is that the BBC, if you look at the broadcasters in terms of Andrew Neil, who is the chairman and editor of the Spectator magazine, you look at Robbie Gibbs, who was the former head of BBC Political Output, is now Theresa May's Director of Communication. You look at Craig Oliver, who was Downing Street's under David Cameron's Chief of Communication, was actually head of programming at the BBC. So this notional idea that the BBC is some left-wing entity is blatantly false. It's actually many times pandering to those on the right. In terms of the issues that you are talking about, I think it's important that the BBC reflects modern Britain, and that means that we address the issues around climate change, around the issue of hate crimes that we've seen in these past few years, and we have an honest and open discussion about the implications of Brexit. We don't want a rerun of the referendum, but just certainly balanced coverage. And so somebody who appears on the BBC regularly, you know, I can't accuse the BBC of shouting down people like me because they give me a platform.
Peter, just quickly, I mean, you talk about the licence fee, and there are many people who do have their issues with it. Do you want to see the BBC shut down or privatised, or just reformed, perhaps, in the way it's run?
I just think that there shouldn't be a licence fee anymore. I think it maybe should be a subscription service. I was torn about that for quite a long time. I no longer am. I think the cultural damage that the BBC does is huge. The idea that somehow or other this is a news service that panders to the right. I mean, I love the way in which you use those sorts of terms, Professor. Panders, you mean covers. They should cover it. You talk about pandering. Do you know, there was a case just this week where the BBC actually had to withdraw something which they admitted was biased. It was aimed at children, 14 to 16-year-olds, and it was about migration, the history of migration into Britain. It was so biased that it was almost laughable, and the BBC actually had to withdraw it because there were so many protests.
Peter, if you look at your record and you look at the record of your party under Gerard
I'm not talking about our party. I'm not talking about the BBC.
You're here as representing the UKIP, so let me at least address the issue of your party. You've become a laughingstock. You've become so far right, it's just despicable.
Mohammed, one second. We could have a great Mohammed. We could have a fantastic debate about UKIP all evening. But I want to ask you about. I want to focus on the BBC.
Sorry, I think this gets to the point. He's got much more of a problem. Anyone to the right of his views are far right. This is ridiculous.
Mohammed, I want to focus on the BBC.
Let me address the issue. I'm arguing the issue that the BBC has a responsibility to have balance. Well, I'm just making a point. You're here representing UKIP, so let me at least address the issue. You've become a far-right party. And I think the fact that you've tanked in the polls, yet you get so much airtime on the BBC, is one of the questions, one of the answers that you get in regards
Mohammed, I want to ask you about... Mohammed, I want to ask you about anti-Semitism and Labour. Do you not think that it is an issue that needs to be covered, or is the BBC just not covering it in a fair way to Jeremy Corbyn? Are they not giving him a fair hearing?
Well, anti-Semitism is a problem. For as long as people are discriminating, harassing and hating against the Jewish community, then I condemn that. I stand with my Jewish brothers and sisters. But we've seen it with the Islamophobia, the rampant Islamophobia that we see within the Conservative Party, led by Boris Johnson in the last few days. This is a problem in both parties, and they have got to be grown up. They've got to address it, and we've got to have a respectability about our politics. Hate may sell newspaper headlines. Hate may get you column inches. Hate may get you airtime on the BBC, but it actually damages the cohesive society we have in this country.
Can I just say, look, the BBC took a very long time to report on the anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. It didn't report on the grooming gangs.